the other thing is that leaders, look, the majority of them look like me, right? They're middle-aged white guys, and I think I have made a mistake that I think a lot of other people like me make. The first mistake was I didn't feel as though I could speak authentically about any of these issues because I'm a middle-aged white guy. And so
Well, I
how
get
could I speak about being a woman, or how could I speak of being a black man or anything else, right? And yet it's like most important for me to speak about it because all the people who look like me are in charge. So if we're going to change anything, it's gotta come from me.
Welcome to another episode of the Rozy Effect, where I give you the keys to lead digital transformation. I'm your host, Rozy Amponsa. Today's guest, Scott Case. Scott is a technologist, an inventor, an entrepreneur, well known as the founding CTO of Priceline.com. As a co-founder and CEO of Upside Business Travel, Scott is reinventing business travel for millions of people each year through new software and systems that take an incredibly complex supply chain and simplify it into a smooth, efficient, and rewarding experience. Talk about disrupting ecosystems. This is going to be a great conversation. You can catch up with Scott over at LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram at @tscottcase. Let's get in the conversation. Scott, thank you and welcome to the Rozy Effect.
Thanks for having me. I'm super stoked to be here.
It's going to be a good conversation. You come with such a wealth of experience within the technology space. And so we're going to be touching on the impact that's going on with the unfortunate impact of the pandemic and different other areas today. So let's delve right into it. With your deep expertise in being a starting co-founder and CTO of Priceline, share with me how you would define digital transformation to be successful.
Well, I think digital transformation is maybe even an outdated concept. The reality is that every aspect of our lives is being impacted by technology all the time, and it's only been accelerating. Mark Andreessen had a famous blog post he had a few years ago that talked about software is eating the world. And everything that we do is impacted in some way, shape, or form by software. The experience we're having right now is being impacted by all kinds of software, all the way down to the core of how the internet works, all the way up through to our experience with our cameras and with our ability to even work remotely. So I think that the way to think about it is from a humanity standpoint, everything we do is impacted by technology, and it's got a yin and a yang to it like everything else. So the question is, how are we using the technology to advance our overall objectives? Is the technology being evenly distributed, and is it being able to be leveraged by everyone? You can see a big part of the challenge right now in the way that technology is distributed is you have a large portion of the world that does not have access to the technology that they need in order to be successful in an environment like this due to the pandemic, and it's disproportionately impacting people of color and women. And we've got a big opportunity as we look at what we're experiencing right now in this moment to say, how are we going to adjust and fix that so that everyone has access to the capabilities that we need in order to be successful? Because that gap is only going to continue to widen, and it's going to become more and more important for people to be able to take advantage of the technology to help them in their lives.
I'm so glad you touch on really the disparities that the way that technology is sort of spread across the board in disadvantaged areas and what can be looked at. So we're going to delve into exactly how leadership can position themselves to bring value and at the same time be able to get returns, right? Because at the end of the day, if you run an organization, that's a key factor. So when we look at being able to deliver greater return and greater success for leadership, how would you advise for them to go about doing that?
So it's been proven again and again and again that diversity of both leadership and of composition of your company and your teams just drives better outcomes. We
Yeah.
make better products, we make more money, we get a better return on investment. I heard a stat recently that venture firms that have diversity in them, um, their returns are 1.4 times higher than those that lack diversity. So it's in our economic interest to bring diverse views and capabilities and experiences to the table. And I think yes, it is diversity in ethnicity, and yes, it's diversity in gender, but it goes way beyond that. Your socioeconomic experience, the fact that you had both your parents there, or you only had one parent, or you experienced something with in your education system. It all of that brings, and we have to do is to create the environment to not only attract people of different backgrounds, but create the inclusive space for people to be able to be themselves at work.
Mm.
One of the things that has been both really rewarding for me as a leader, but also has heightened my awareness of the fact that this isn't true in a lot of businesses is I've had a number of people who have told me that working at Upside is the first time they've ever been able to really be themselves at work, that where they weren't showing up and sort of putting on a mask to be something other than who they were. And that for us, it's fantastic because we're getting the best of them. Because when you bring yourself to work every day as to your authentic who you are, that means you bring everything, which is all the stuff that we want to help make our products better and our customers happier, and frankly, to be good peers to each other as we build things together. So I think the first thing for leaders is get real about the value of having that diverse and inclusive kind of a culture, and then bake it into your actual business objectives. So it's just the same way that you want to drive some revenue target or you want to launch some new product. You've got to have some objectives and some measurement around how diverse is your team, how inclusive is your team, and how do you bake that into who you are and what you do. And I will tell you, it is not easy. It's not easy for anybody. It's not easy for the first Black woman engineer that you choose to hire, or the first LGBTQ person that uses the pronouns they. It's not easy for them, and it's not easy for you. But guess what? Being a little uncomfortable is part of what makes you grow. And so you got to take it on and be authentic about it, and deal with the fact that you're going to make mistakes and you're not going to get it right. But the payoff is so powerful that it's absolutely worth playing for.
Man, you mentioned things that just hit straight home for me because, growing up and not having that access and realizing what it means to be able to gain access and then be able to pave paths for those that I'm mentoring, those that I'm sort of, supporting moving forward. Even where I am today, right? Being in tech. Typically, I'm the only Black woman within teams. How do I navigate that? And then being able to deliver. So really, really vital that you're really going straight for the jugular on the issue at hand and what can be done to be able to solve that. I was interviewing a leader at a VC firm recently, and she's focused on women, she's focused on diversity, and the key thing here she's noticing is yes, the data is there. They use that, they drive that to be able to get the necessary funding support for their entrepreneurs. You've also touched on the value on actually bringing in diversity and actually implementing inclusivity within these organizations, yet the numbers are still where they are. Okay.
Yeah.
So recently, we've seen the impact that COVID has brought onto us. How should leadership? I believe this time is an amazing opportunity for leadership because we've gotten a lot of stand-ups, a lot of voices behind, the racial tension that has come up. How do we change from the conversation to actuation?
Well, first off, we all need to accept that it took us, we've been at this for hundreds and hundreds of years and baking in racism and bias into our systems. And so it's going to take a little time to get it undone. That doesn't mean we don't work on it, but we have to set our expectations that this is a long haul and we've got to commit to it over a long period of time, thinking, decades. This is not going to go away overnight. So first thing is, let's set our expectations to be, we got to get going on it. We got to work on it every day, and it's got to be a part of who we are, and it's got to be part of our goals and objectives. I think the other thing is that leaders, look, the majority of them look like me. right? They're middle-aged white guys, and I think I have made a mistake that I think a lot of other people like me make. The first mistake was I didn't feel as though I could speak authentically about any of these issues because I'm a middle-aged white guy. And so
Don't like
how
it.
could I speak about being a woman, or how could I speak of being a black man or anything else, right? And yet it's like most important for me to speak about it because all the people who look like me are in charge. So if we're going to change anything, it's gotta come from me. So a mistake I made was
Say that again.
I'm learning myself what it means to be an ally and what it means to provide access. And admittedly, I did it in my own little way, right? Like I've always been very open. I say yes to people. I have supported lots of women entrepreneurs, lots of people of color who are entrepreneurs, just as being an entrepreneur. Because to me, being an entrepreneur is kind of like we all suffer with the same things. But what I realized in talking to those entrepreneurs over the last 2 decades, everything that's hard about being a startup founder is the same, except for the fact that it's 10 times or 100 times harder to be a woman or be a person of color in doing it. And so, I understood that by trying to break down the barriers that I could kind of one at a time. But what I didn't realize was how important it was for me to use my voice and to bring that not just into our tiny little company at Upside, but to think about it as how do I become an ally? How do I advocate and do that? So that's probably the biggest single thing that leaders need to do is to recognize that you have a role to play in not just pointing to its importance, but actually leading and speaking about it, and then beginning to implement the changes in your world that you can. We all lead our companies. We make choices about what our hiring ethos is going to be. How do we create space for inclusivity? How do we think about it as a first order, first class thing about what we do as a business? And I think up until very recently, a lot of leaders kind of outsource the problem. I'm going to hire a diversity and inclusion expert. I'm going to have my HR team take this on. The reality is that your executive team needs to own this and take responsibility for it, just like you take responsibility for your sales goals or your profit or anything else that's in your business. And it's difficult. It's, you're not going to get it right the first time. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. And part of what I've learned is that whatever minor discomfort I might have over these subjects and talking about them is a tiny percentage of what you as a Black woman go through just living your life every day. So I think I could take on that burden. And I think most of my colleagues as leaders can take on that burden, and we should. So that's how I think about it. The action part of it is you got to look in your own world first. What do you do to change your business, and how do you change your own hiring standards and that work? And then how do you project that out into your other constituencies, your stakeholders, whether it's your investors or it's your customers or your partners, and how do you project that out and be a little brave about it? I think if we speak out to those constituencies, that's a role that we can play, and the first step is heightening the awareness of it. And I could talk a little bit about, in some respects, this is as much a bias issue that's tied to a marketing problem as anything else.
Okay, we'll dive in there, but I want you to give me a bit more insight. You're transforming really the way that business travel is at Upside. How is that, actualizing itself within your organization?
So, as a company, our thinking about business travel is that the traveler who has to travel for work is kind of the hero of our product. At the end of the day, they're the person who has to get on a plane or get in a car and drive somewhere, and their objective is to accomplish a business outcome. And our job is to make sure that we basically remove all of the barriers to that business objective being achieved. And the way we do that is we have a set of software and technology that makes it very easy for a person to arrange travel. We make it super easy for the person who's traveling to get support all along the way. And then we provide the company that those employees work for a bunch of information that allows them to see how their investment is paying off from a travel standpoint. And our product is free. So it doesn't cost the company anything. It doesn't cost the travelers anything. You get the same great rates that you get on the internet if you were to buy directly from the airlines, but you get a lot of other benefits that otherwise you wouldn't get. And we kind of stitch together all these other small businesses. We turn around and we buy the travel less expensively because we basically act as an aggregator. And so we scoop up a lot of the spending that was already happening. We turn around and say, hey, look, these are small businesses that are important. We get a discount from the airlines and hotels, and we keep that difference. And that's how we support our business.
Nice, nice. And you touched a little bit about measuring success and some of the biases that you're noticing with ingrained marketing strategy. Let's delve a bit into that, right? One, let's point this out. And then also, what would you advise leadership to be looking out for? What are those red flags look like? Being in a position where they can actually be able to impact the organization and create change.
Well, the first thing is to understand that racism and bias is baked into every stakeholder group you have. So your employees are experiencing it, your customers are experiencing it, or your clients, your suppliers, your partners. Everybody has this as part of what they're doing. So, you've got to understand that for your business to be successful, you kind of have to overcome these things because it's everywhere. And when I describe this as a marketing problem, I think it's as much about communicating and raising the awareness of this issue and sustaining it over the long haul.
Mm.
That's what's going to get it to change. Yes, it's important for us to protest. Yes, it's important for us to stand up for these things and to take that momentum in this time. But if you're concerned about police brutality, there's 18,000 police precincts all spread across this country. It's going to take a while for that to change. That doesn't mean you don't keep after it, but it means you got to keep a steady drumbeat of focus on it over long periods of time. I got involved in working on malaria in sub-Saharan Africa in 15 years ago. And we knew at the time it was a 20, 25, 30-year thing. Doesn't mean we didn't start. It just means let's get going on it. And we did a lot of things in the 5 years that I ran the organization, and then the next 5 years when I was on the board, and now the next 5 years that they've done and continue to advocate. And the numbers of cases and the number of deaths from malaria continue to go down every year. But it takes a long time. And if we're going to transform the way our country views racism, we've got to do things like explain to other leaders what it means to be anti-racist. I think most leaders think I'm not racist. Like I'm diverse. I care about other people. Like I'm nice to anybody who comes to me, but that's a good start, but it doesn't mean that you're not propping up the system. How are you benefiting from the system, and how do you kind of dismantle those things that are creating bias and negative outcomes for others? And then the other thing we have to get real about is that, and then again, I view a marketing problem, it's an awareness, is that I don't have to lose for you to win.
Mm.
This is not a zero-sum game.
Mhm.
This is not a scarcity thing. This is an abundance thing. There is no reason why you can't be successful and I can't be successful at the same time. And it's just it's a misguided notion that we've baked in. So again, when I think of this as a marketing problem, it's about helping people see some of these either false issues like, hey, it's not really scarcity, it's abundance, or these ideas that just because you personally as an individual do not have racist thoughts or racist ideas does not mean that you are being anti-racist and that your behaviors and things aren't propping up some of these systems. And it's uncomfortable to talk about because it's hard, but like we just got to get real about it.
It has to be done. It has to be done. Wow. You have started multiple companies, you've mentored multiple startups. And so I would say you're quite an expert when it comes to identifying the key sort of elements of leaders within organizations that can help you get that vision into reality. And so, what should leadership be looking for from their people to really help them not only overcome the current state of uncertainty, but then also be able to identify them, position them in the right way, given the right skill set to help them thrive in this element of transformation?
I think leaders have to create the space for their teams to operate and for their leaders to be able to step up. And I kind of refined my own take on it as it's got three really important parts, and they're really in order. You kind of have to have each one before the prerequisites, if you will. So the first is transparency. You've got to be able to make sure that you provide everybody in your organization the information they need to be successful. If you're not doing that, then the rest of the stuff doesn't work. And being transparent doesn't necessarily mean, you're pasting everybody's salary up on the internet. That can be, but it's more about defining the fact that these are the things that we're going to be transparent about. At Upside, we don't talk about compensation, we don't talk about people's health concerns, but other than that, we're pretty open book about everything. If I have something that's happened, usually within 2 or 3 business days, everybody in the whole company has been made aware of it. So being transparent so that everybody understands, and that can be very risky, or it can feel risky because if they knew about that, then they might do something else. Like, yeah, well, guess what? There are no secrets in the world anyway. So you might as well just lay them out for everybody so that you get to set the expectations. So number one, transparency, making sure people have what they need. The second is what I define as ownership, which is a combination of responsibility, which is often what we think of when we delegate, but we often screw up and don't give the second part, which is authority. You have to give people the authority to deliver on their responsibility. And if you don't give them ownership, that combination of responsibility and authority, they can't be successful. And if you've ever found yourself in a spot where you had a responsibility without authority, you're done. There's no way you can get there. So the second thing is that level of ownership. And then the third thing is resiliency. You have got to bake into your thinking as a leader that your people are going to make mistakes. And the question is, are you prepared to rally your organization around the fact that when a mistake gets made, we all just go fix it and that we learn from it? And so the trick is that you behave in a resilient way so that people are willing to exercise their ownership, make decisions, and unlock the potential that they have to move as quickly as possible, and knowing that if they make a mistake or they make a decision that you don't get the outcome you want on it, that they're not going to get fired, that they're actually going to learn from it, and they're going to get better as individuals. You do those three things, transparency combined with ownership, and you create a resilient environment. That's how you're going to identify who your leaders are, because the leaders will take those things and they will run with them. They will make the decisions. They'll lead the teams. They'll inspire others. They just rise right out of it. But if you don't give them those capabilities, it doesn't matter what attributes the leaders have themselves. They can't be successful. So it's on us as leaders to create that space. Then those people can rise up.
Transparency, having the authority, and being resilient. Let's touch a bit deeper on resiliency. We're all unfortunately being faced with what's going on with the pandemic right now. What is your take and advice for leadership? How are we navigating this uncertainty? And how do we transition from putting band-aids on situations to creating a long-term strategy?
Yeah, so there's kind of 3 things you have to do, and especially when you're dealing with a crisis. So, let me actually step back. So before you have a crisis, if you've done the things I've talked about creating that sense of transparency and ownership and resiliency, you practice those in small ways so that when you have a big crisis, you're already practiced as an organization around it. So you almost have to solve the problem before you actually have the problem, because if you are in a crisis and you were disorganized or you didn't have those things, it's 10 times worse.
Yeah.
When you're in a crisis, you've got to do a few things. One is you got to stabilize the current situation, understand where you are, and do whatever you have to do to kind of triage and the acute care part of it. Like, I've got to stop the bleeding. I've got to figure that out. So that's step 1. Step 2 is once you've got it stabilized, you now have to take a step back and say, okay, are there any other things we need to do in the emergency state that we're in right now, right? Is there anything we need to do? We've solved the immediate, oh my God, it's urgent, like the world's falling apart. Now we've got to deal with, all right, is there anything else we have to do there? And then look forward, which is your third step, which is, okay, how you look out at the horizon here and define what you're going to do to continue to win in this new reality. And the crisis could be something that happened inside your company. In this case, it's something that's happened to humanity. It's come at us from all these places. So the trick is, how do you look out at that horizon and And that's really hard, but it's critical for business leaders to constantly lift your head up, look out at the horizon, and make sure that the strategy that you have is still going to get you where you want to go, based on all the new information that we're getting. So an example inside Upside's world,
Yeah.
we thought business travel was going to be devastatingly impacted for about 6 to 9 months when this all started. So we thought, by the end of the year. Now it's looking like it's going to be a lot longer.
Yeah.
Okay, so listen, we literally had a meeting with our executive team yesterday where we said, okay, if it's going to be a lot longer, do we change anything about our strategy? Is there anything that's different about it? Do we accelerate some things? Do we slow some things down? And we said, well, if this lasts for another 18 months from where we are now, so the end of 2021, what things would we do differently, if any? We identified one or two things and we said, okay, let's go figure out how we're going to execute against them. That's our jobs as leaders. So when you're in a crisis situation, you have to get to a place where you can lift your head again. So the first things you got to do is get through that emergency period, get things stable, and see if there's anything else you need to do to keep that basic relative near-term stability. Then lift your head up and figure out where you're going. Those are the things you absolutely have to do in order to power through and be successful.
Can you share one specific thing that has sort of, been at the forefront now at Upside, moving forward, that long-term strategy, what that looks like, something that might not have been there prior to the pandemic kind of shifting things for you?
Yeah, it's a really great question. The biggest thing is, in order for us to be successful, we need to get customers. And when there are fewer customers traveling, you need to figure out how you get in front of the ones that are traveling with our product and our solution. And so we actually looked at a very different distribution strategy, more through partnerships versus direct to consumers, because partners that have an installed base of customers, but for whom, could be better off being served by our technology, means that you're fishing in a pond that's already well stocked, as opposed to going out and trying to figure it out on your own. So that was and the pandemic itself created space for those distribution partnerships to take our calls in ways that pre-pandemic they would not have.
Yeah.
So it's you have to have your head up, look at it, make the decisions, then make those phone calls, and it's turned out to be really valuable to us.
Nice. Nice. With an organization like Upside, it sounds you guys are nimble, agile, forever changing to really suit that end customer. So when we talk about upskilling within organizations, what is your advice to leadership, right? In today's world, our organizations are made of a melting pot of generations. How should leadership go about really positioning themselves to upskill such a melting pot to still be able to, thrive and be positioned to succeed and hit those business goals that they're looking to achieve?
It's not easy to do that well, and I will admit that at Upside we have at various times struggled with it ourselves. The first is attitudinal. It's to recognize that your employees are not going to work at your company for the next 30 years. Yeah. So they're going to move on to something else. And part of our jobs as leaders is for the period that they're at our company, to make sure that they are not only net contributors to our team and our accomplishments, but that we are net contributors to their career and their development. And so I think that my own view is that most individuals have to take on the responsibility of their career development on their own in modern times. There is no other way to do it. So I'm a big fan of a book called The Startup of You, Reid Hoffman and John Cassova. So understanding that you're in charge, and make sure that you as an individual have a level up plan or growth plan that defines where do you want to get to, and that you work with your manager to do it. The flip side of it is, as leaders, we have to create the space for that. We have to communicate the priority, and that this is important, and that you talk about it on a regular basis, and you come back to it every 3-6 months, and then it's baked into the work that you do as part of the development of the people who you work with. How do you coach them, advise them, give them the opportunities that they need to get where they need to go?
I'm so glad you touched on this sense of individual transformation, because that's one key element that I speak so heavily about because our sort of digital world and the physical world is forever melding together. And in today's spaces, this is where also purpose and passion, and I know that's an area that you talk about too, and being able to really take responsibility for the direction of the path or the career that you're looking to build out. So let's wrap it up with some more organizational culture. I think that also taps into what you hit on the value of diversity. How should leadership look about change is coming? It's occurring constantly, whether we like it or not. And there was a quote I read that said, if you don't change, basically the pandemic will change for you. And so the culture is consistently changing. How should leadership not, I mean, they need to be positioned to take advantage of this, but then also position your organization to thrive in the forever changing, external cultures, and then also on an internal level as well.
I'll come back to something that I mentioned earlier, which is baking into your organization and your culture that resiliency is a core tenet. It's a core part of who you are, and that you're going to get new information. You're going to evaluate that information, and you're going to check it against your strategy. And part of having a resilient culture is that if you have to change, everybody can look at the new information. That's where the transparency comes in. Everybody can say, okay, I understand my responsibility and the authority I have to change my part of this thing to be able to change and adapt to it. That part of the culture is a critical component to helping get through any kind of change. And I think that if you basically build that into your cultural fabric, those elements become the way that you deal with anything that comes at you. Because sometimes it may be a cultural force from outside, sometimes it may be something that bubbles up from inside your organization, sometimes it may be something that happens with your customers or your industry, or who knows where it's going to come from. And the thing that I've learned of doing, basically being a leader and being particularly in the startup game in technology, is that I can't predict everything, and the ability to plan for everything that might happen it's a fool's errand. So the best thing to do is to get good at the resiliency piece of it, so that way anything that shows up, you're just ready to take it on, because that way that is something you can practice and get good at, which means you can become experts in it, which you can't become experts in predicting the future.
And I want to end with what is one thing that you have seen working alongside entrepreneurs or mentoring entrepreneurs that you've seen it's been a shift in the now with the pandemic that you would either advise for them to do more of or advise for them to look sort of in a different direction?
I think that there's three categories of company that have emerged, and it's sort of been sliding through the pandemic in this month. There's a group that got whacked, like our company. I call them the BAM group. Bam, you got hit, you were done. You had to recalibrate everything.
Yeah.
Then there's another group that was the winning group. Their businesses took off because of this. It was naturally occurred. Those two groups, they're in great shape because they have clarity of what their reality is. There's a lagging group that's in the middle. It's the majority. And some of them are falling into it's now all of a sudden a problem, even though it was a problem all along, but now they're waking up to it. It's like, oh man, this is going to be there. Right? They're getting clobbered. And I think that the lagging group is at risk. And there's a bigger piece in there. I think there are people that think that they're winning or surviving that are misunderstanding how this is going to play out over the next 12 to 18 months. And there's two factors. One is the pandemic part of it is not going away. We're going to be in this health situation for a while. And even when we have a vaccine, it's not a miracle. No. It's going to take a long time to distribute. It's likely to be more than one vaccine, more than one dose to be effective. And there's going to be a lot of people who are uncomfortable taking it because it's been rushed through. So it's going to be culturally challenging for that. So there's the pandemic piece. And then there's the recession. There are a lot of things that we have done to prop up our economy over the last 4 months were absolutely necessary and important, but they're starting to expire. And so there's going to be a drag on the economy for a while. And I think every business leader needs to recognize that. We need to look further out and say, how do we operate in this state for a longer period of time than we anticipated? Nobody be more happy than I am to have that, to me, be wrong and to say, no, but we recovered a lot faster, things were a lot better. Because the good news is that the upside trajectory, it's a lot easier to plan for and chase that down than it is this long, slow bit. So my counsel is, if you're in that middle group where you think that you're going to be fine, keep rechecking yourself, because it's much more likely that it's going to be a longer haul, and you got to really make sure that you're ready for it.
Oh, this was good. Thank you so very much for your time, Scott.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, leaders, I told you this was going to be a good one. You see, it's these kind of conversations why the Rozy Effect was born. Digital transformation touches on all facets of our lives across industries. And so when the disparities are not really honed in on, touched on, and really identify where change can happen, then what is the impact to our society, our community? And so I'm grateful for leaders like Scott, where they're able to highlight the kind of changes they're doing within the organization, and then also being in a position of influence and change in tech, being able to highlight and really hone in on decisions, actions that leaders that are in his position can take in terms of creating that change, being able to close that gap and bringing opportunity when we talk about diversity within the tech space, diversity within digital transformation. Because at the end of the day, organizations are looking to serve a diverse population. And so the value in having that reflected within your organizations, within their teams, is so pivotal. And I'm so glad that he just went straight for it. By the way, Scott is curating convos at Founders Focus. It's a safe place for leaders to share challenges, wins, and the future of entrepreneurship amid the chaos of now. Check it out at home.upside.com/founders focus. All right, and as you all know, make sure that you leave a rating and leave a review here at Apple's iTunes podcast, and also in your favorite podcast if you want to listen to it. Did you enjoy this? Share with a friend. And as you know, we don't walk to the rozyeffect.com, we run, because I don't want you to miss out on another dope conversation. So head over to the rozyeffect.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Rozy Amponsa.